Hello, and welcome to APICS Extra Live, The Potential for Progress, with Andrew Krieger. My name is Jennifer Storelli, Associate Editor at APICS. Before we begin, I'd like to run through a few details. At the end of the presentation, we will save time for a question and answer session. If you look at the right toolbar on your screen, you'll see a questions box. To ask your question at any time during the presentation, simply type it in the box and click Send. If you experience any technical difficulties during today's broadcast, please call GoToWebinar Tech Support at 1-805-617-7000. Again, that's 1-805-617-7000. This presentation is being recorded and will be available at apics.org/extralive starting early next week. And now it's a pleasure to introduce our speaker for today. Andrew J. Krieger, CPIM, CSCP, is the Director of Inventory Management at Emerson Network Power in Columbus, Ohio. He has more than 15 years of operations, supply chain, and process improvement experience. Please give a warm welcome to Andrew Krieger. Andrew, you may begin.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Like Jennifer said, my name is Andrew. I'm with Emerson right now. I appreciate your time, and I also understand and know how busy everybody is, so I won't spend too much time on any one slide. We'll fly through this pretty quick. So we're going to look at roll throughput yield here. Some of you are probably very familiar with this if you've been involved in process improvement, Six Sigma, and so forth. For this, and we'll get into that in just a second. Contents of this presentation, though, we'll just hit a high level and not get too much into any one detail. We can discuss that through Q&A or through contact later. We'll take a quick look at roll throughput yield just in case you haven't heard of it. We'll talk about briefly why can we or should we use it, how to apply it, how to extend it even further since it is simple, and then we'll talk about it being part of a balanced scorecard, and then we'll hit some summary here. A quick glance at that, like I said, it's Six Sigma primarily, although it's actually much older because it's probability. But second here, roll throughput yield, or RT some people say, is simply just a measure of risk, really. If you look at it that way, it answers, what's the chance that a product or service can make it through my process error-free, whenever we view it that way. So what are the chances? Let's answer that question here. It's real simple. In this process example, we see 100 units coming in. It could be any process. It could be any service. Again, it doesn't have to be manufacturing. That's a misconception I run into often is a lot of people, especially process improvement, they think it has to be part of a machine. It doesn't have to be anything. So for this example, 100 go in, 99 come out. The yield would be 99 over 100, so it's 99%. So the chance here is 1% of errors making it through here. Your first time yield, or simply yield, is just the number of acceptable units produced the first time through divided. It's pretty obvious from the example up top. And again, as I already stated, and I have an example down here at the bottom here for a service. So, you provided a service, consulting, whatever it is, to 10 customers. You asked 8 of them. They said, yeah, I was acceptable, or your performance was acceptable. I enjoyed your service. You could, in theory, calculate that yield as 80%. So take that one step further, yield versus RTY. When we refer to process yield, we're just generally talking about a one step. And again, we can go off into the weeds on some of these details. I have no intention to hit every single facet of RTY today. So yield is generally a single process. RTY is a total process. And when we throw everything in there in one measurement across all of the steps. And to calculate, we multiply each step in the process together, the yields, that is. And of course, we're assuming that these are independent. So here in the example, we have 3 processes. Like I said, calculate the individual yields, which we'll see another example here in just a second. On this bottom point here, independence implies that the yield of each process step is independent from the prior step. So, and again, there can be some debate on this. A common thing as well. If I have, say, 3 machines and they all work in succession, maybe the third machine can't do or perform a particular function without the second. And that's perfectly right. you're right. But at the same time, though, if those are separate, completely separate functions, and they're not, in fact, like the third machine has nothing to do with the second or the first, you can reasonably assume that they're independent. I mean, technically, anything can affect anything, but if they're not running together, that's independence. And the example that's typically given is a roll of a dice. You roll your dice. You know, the one throw doesn't affect another throw. So that's the common example you'll see in statistics, folks. The goal here, of course, would be 100% yield. That's perfection here. R2Y is a supply chain metric. So why would we consider using it? Well, it's easy. As you can see from the examples, it's just multiplication, really. Well, let me rephrase that here. The measurement, the metric itself is multiplication. You have to make sure it's clearly defined first, and we can get that here shortly. That incorporates all the steps in a value creation. So we'll see here in a few slides that instead of just focusing on one particular process, you can bring everything into the value stream and calculate one measure to it. It identifies the CTs, and those are your critical twos. You can have the critical to customer, critical to quality, critical to process, however you want to define that. It can incorporate that. It focuses improvement efforts quickly. Again, there's very little ambiguity because it hones in on a particular step of your value creation or process. And then it provides a total system KPI. So, and you can extend that into a balanced scorecard or even in your S&OP framework. Again, it becomes a KPI. So how do we do it? Well, we just list and flowchart your value stream. Again, here's a very generic process. We have 3 steps, any steps, service, machines, whatever. And you just map it out here real quick. And you go through, you measure the yield for each step. And you can keep this simple. We can keep it, again, it's just, you can keep it pass or fail. You may have a well-defined and robust measuring our performance system in place, or really high value analytics software that does all this for you, and that's fine. That's fine. Again, you may not need this if you have something in place, but unfortunately, some of the companies that I have experience with don't measure their total supply chain as one entity. It's normally broken down. You know, we have a only safety measure, and we have a quality measure, and we have this measure. It's nice to see, you know, what's our supply chain measure a whole, and this is an easy way to do it. So we line them up, we calculate the yields. I say FTY, it's just first time yield or yield. You can call it, it doesn't really matter what you call it, that's just the terminology here. And then the process, again, we just multiply it through. You can see this bottom example here, it's 99 times, or it would be 0.99 times 1 times 0.95, and you end up with 94% there. So that bottom example here, you would expect 6% of your products or services to have a defect. Here's another way to look at it too. Here's a very generic value stream, obviously, and typically, again, most companies, especially operations side, they're going to have that internal focus. You can see down at the bottom, we have the 3 processes, and you can see at the very top what that focus is. And if somebody said, hey, you know, what's this product's roll throughput yield? What's 0.85 times 0.99 times 0.99, and you got 83%. So, and that's a great place to start. That's very important. We got to start somewhere. But I think it takes on a better meaning, a deeper meaning, and even exposes. It identifies where you might be exposed when we can extend that. And you can see up on the left top there, we added the suppliers in there. And then you can see what that did to our roll throughput yield. So we can look at the yield. You know, again, you can define a pass-fail or however you want to define that, whatever your system's set in place is to define that. And you can see now is originally we thought it was going to be 83%. And once we add the suppliers in there, it drops to 74%, almost a 10-point drop. And to me, that for me is in the past has been far more meaningful, because the way I see it is my customer really doesn't care if it was a machine that caused a problem or a supplied part that we missed at an inspection. all I know is they had a bad part, or they had a bad service. So in here in the red, we can add the additional steps, and we can see it exposes risk. We have potential improvement opportunities that they become apparent. It's not just process, or it's not just machines, like I said, it's with suppliers now. And then it also, when you take it further, you can find this added cost that might be hiding, and it might be hiding in rework and overtime. There's been, I'm sure many of you have experienced times when you have launched an improvement initiative and seen a dramatic improvement, and then you look at the finances and all of a sudden your costs go through the roof, and you do a little bit of digging and you find out, well, yeah, we have 100% yield now because we added a lot of overtime and rework, so nothing gets through. Well, to me, you haven't really hit the, you might prevent it from getting to your customer, but I don't think that the root cause hasn't been dealt with. So another thing I wanted to point out here too is when you bring everything into focus, it immediately becomes clear that you can see the benefit of simplifying processes. And then every additional step in the process, it does add the potential for more defects, which of course provides the incentive to remove or reduce complexity. I mean, just combining certain, maybe going to a cellular system and combining things, you can remove complexity out of your process. So once you've defined that, once we've got our yields and then we've calculated our roll throughput yield, what I've done in the past and what really helps me hone in better is to extend it even further. Again, there's debate on this, and I admit that, and that's perfectly fine. It's healthy debate. But follow my reasoning here. So let's just take supplier C that we saw at the value stream before that. What is it about supplier C that we want to focus on? I mean, it's nice to know that we know, hey, in this value stream, we have a potential, or we have a problem. We have a performance issue with supplier C, and that's great. But what is it about supplier C? Well, we measure supplier C on three levels: service, quality, and on-time delivery. Well, you're really just breaking it out. Now you actually have, you can define those as individual processes now for supplier C within your own value stream. And you can define it here. You have service, quality, on-time delivery. Which one is it? Well, it's obviously not on-time delivery. When you multiply those three, you can see the impact immediately. So if you view them as individual processes, now you have an extension of your roll throughput yield. And this helps in honing in on not just where there's a problem, but what aspect of the concern it is you're going to focus on. From there, you can work to establish targets. One of the things that I do on a regular basis is I just create a very simple spreadsheet of improvement targets and the impacts, and I break them down so I can see which supplier, which process, which transportation company, whatever it is, if we could increase or improve the performance and work with them, what you already know. So there's no guesswork where, we hope to achieve this. Well, you can find out real quick, and you can hone in the focus on those here. So and it's a good tool for leadership too. So when you come up and you say, well, we're going to focus on supplier C's on-time delivery, and your leadership team is, well, why? And how much? Well, here you go. You got a real simple thing. You can say, well, currently it's at 95. We take it to 96. Our total roll throughput yield on the far right goes to 75.2. Again, these are just examples. You can make up your own. And then it can help you to understand and then you can question them. Are these reasonable targets? Maybe, maybe not. Again, you and your leadership team would need to decide that. Let's look at the balanced scorecard real quick. Of course, this is a horrible template for a balanced scorecard, but it's in essence what you have. You typically have the four perspectives: financial, customer focused, your internal processes, and then your organization. So, and again, you can apply it to anything. We just use the balanced scorecard because some departments rely on that. And I see now that the SNOP is being is becoming a very critical part of this balanced scorecard in some companies, which is, I think that's a fantastic thing here. But if your business does use this, maybe consider adding this rolled throughput yield measure as your internal processes. There's sometimes some confusion on this. There's been discussion, well, why not put it in the customer focus? Well, whenever we finally did resolve this issue, we decided that we're not really measuring the customer's happiness. Is our focus on that is handled through other departments, the internal processes. What is going to get? Let's prevent that. Let's focus in on our own processes through the customer. So that's typically why we throw it in there. You could also review it with your leadership. If you use the Balanced Scorecard, you know about the 9 steps of success, and there's a website I put down out there. It's a good website. It explains it pretty well. The supply chain RTY is a strategic measurement within your scorecard matrix, can be easily linked to the improvement initiatives and tied back again to those scenarios that we just looked at in the prior slide. Again, I can't stress enough how much use I've gotten out of it. Are there better measurements? Yeah, there might be. Again, use what works. This is simple, it's intuitive, it's easy to explain, it's easy to track, it's pass, fail, and it works wonderful into a higher level system. Down at the bottom though, and again, this is where, for me, the value comes from, because like I said, it's quick. A potential initiative moves from a generic goal of, hey, go and improve your supply chain performance, to a specific goal of, we're going to improve on-time delivery from supplier C by 2% to get to 97%, and that to me is a far better goal. And you're going to get what you measure, so it helps immensely to put that in there. And again, it works great in S&OP. It's easy, and I think it extends well. It connects directly to improvement initiatives. You have a common language with your black belts that your company uses them. So I highly recommend you put it into those processes. And I promised it would be quick, so it's been very quick. So let me just summarize real quick. For our roll throughput yield, it does assume that your process steps are independent. And again, you can do a little bit of research or talk to experts or even just your leadership team and determine if they're independent. It should be pretty obvious. Again, I don't think you have to hire a team of statisticians to come in and figure that out. The roll throughput yield is a measure of risk. Many of you are probably using score processes or supply chain risk measurements. That's great, and maybe you don't need roll throughput yield, but if you don't have something, I think this is a great place to start. It's flexible, easy to understand. It can be broken down into levels, helps you focus in on improvements and across the board, and gives you scenarios. It generally improves as processes become simpler. That's a key takeaway. And it can be integrated into a management systems such as the Balanced Scorecard or S&OP process. So for the resources I told you about, we had, these are really easy reads. They're definitely not academic in the traditional sense. But I put them in here. I put Chance in here. It's a great book by Emerson, and he talks about the independence of events in one of it. It's a real short chapter. It's great. There's a nice little book, even you can learn statistics. It has some things in there about independence. Six Sigma Demystified. Paul Keller, the author on that one, does a great job talking about roll throughput yield. It goes a little bit off into the DPU and estimating quality through that, so you might not be interested in that part, but again, it can be incorporated. And then, like I said, the website for the Balanced Scorecard, if you don't use one and you're interested, you should check that site out.
Thank you, Andrew. And now I'd like to give you, the audience, a chance to ask Andrew your questions. As a reminder, look at the right toolbar on your screen, type your question in the questions box, and click send. We'll now give you a few moments to send in your questions. Okay, Andrew. So viewer Stephen asks, by rolling up many different disciplines such as procurement, production, and shipping into one measurement, how do you avoid the risk of, number one, squabbling between which organization is driving poor results, and number two, one result reduces the chance of multiple groups acting at the same time on different subtasks?
Great questions. For me on the number one, I've run into that before. I believe that if it's a fully integrated S&OP process or balanced scorecard, and each department has it clearly defined how they calculate their yield, their pass-fail, I think the focus becomes almost automatic, and it typically will reduce any. In my experiences, it reduces any chance of it. And then also, it's so important to use a high-level management philosophy, or some people call them steering committees, to prevent that. And that number two is very. You really got to watch out for number two. That happens frequently. If it's guided well, you have a management philosophy in place. You've clearly identified that metric, and people are watching it and engaged. You can control that or mitigate that potential for overlap through, like I said, maybe a steering committee or so forth. I hope that I answered the questions properly that he asked.
Stephen, if you have any follow-up, feel free to submit another question and we can send him your follow-up. But in the meantime, Jeff asks, can you weight processes if they are not really important?
Oh, that's a good one. That sounds potentially like another, but I think that would need to be reviewed. And I would have to see the entire measurement system first. That's a good question. I don't know if it would be necessary. Well, again, you can break it down. If you can clearly define a break in each process, I think you could just handle it across the board as pass, fail. So the pass divided by the total, and calculate them separately and roll that back up. But that would need to be reviewed, just to be completely honest.
Sounds good. And now a few people are asking about if you have any real-world examples from your company or from other companies you've talked to where they have implemented this roll throughput yield process and how it's helped them.
Yes, I have actually quite a few examples. I was formerly in the Tier 1 automotive business, and I'll just leave it like that. And it was a typical silo organization that happens everywhere. It wasn't until we discussed this and implemented roll throughput yield with our suppliers and presented it to the board that they could understand the impact that every department had on each other. See, that was one of the biggest problems we had was things would get held up in receiving department. Another thing too is we would have reworks. We were a high output organization. Parts would end up in rework or quality hold and just sit there. And I'm sure people will have experience with that. And the result was that it would hold up other departments, or it wouldn't get done right, or there's a problem, but it was detached because it would be sent on forward to the next process. There could have been weeks or a month before the part came from, say, process step 2 to process step 3, and that chain was essentially broke. It was hard to go back and trace. Once we rolled all that up, we were able, once we started to measure the actual receiving and quality departments as pass and fail, again, it was simple. We just created several, like 5 to 10 point standard work document. We implemented, hey, do these things. If these things aren't done, that inspection process could fail. Once we were clearly defined it, rolled it back up, things started to improve, I'd say fairly quickly, because there was nowhere to hide. Well, it was more difficult to hide. I'll just leave it like that.
Great. And watcher Steve is wondering if there's any case studies or blogs or books that you would point them to show them, again, how roll throughput yield can be applied in real-world situations.
Oh, good question. There's the short answer is there are. I apologize. I don't have any websites handy or that I can think of. I just recommend you Google the Demystified book. He does a fantastic job of explaining it, and I think it's pretty. Roll throughput yield as a process measurement is pretty common in any of the, especially Six Sigma literature. I would just recommend Googling it. There's some very good sites out there. I think his name is Preislich. He's considered one of the experts in Six Sigma. I hope I said his name right. And he has at least he used to have an animated version of roll throughput yield, so you could visually see it's being calculated in the yield and the process, and that was helpful too.
And John is wondering, can RTY be used for internal process improvements, such as in a continuous improvement type project?
Yes, actually, I would recommend, if there's not already a well-defined management system in place, or rather committee oversight, I would recommend starting with roll throughput yield. Again, if you can see that processes have independent steps, theoretically you could continue to break every process, every step, every service down into its into some serious detail, and find out what, not only which process, but which aspect or which characteristic of each process I need to hone in. So I would recommend starting with that.
Excellent. Well, thank you for your time, Andrew. Oh, we just had one more question. So Steve asks, part of using RTY is knowing the business process flow. Has it been a challenge trying to get different departments to understand and document their processes first before using RTY?
Oh, yeah, great question. Yes, yeah. In fact, in my experience, that's the hardest part. It's getting everybody on board, and especially if a department has historically poor performance, however that's defined, it can be almost a nightmare to get management in certain silos to basically expose themselves. So I think the measurement itself is easy, and that's why I recommend using RTY. It's getting everybody on board that can be the hardest part.
Do you have any tips for how to get everybody on board?
Oh, yes. Sorry about that. Yeah, absolutely. I think it has to be, my experience is it has to be from leadership. Leadership should be driving this. However, if you can't get maybe leadership to buy in, or maybe they don't understand it, it really goes a long way to create an example of your own department or process that you're in charge of. And again, you don't have to be a manager. You could be a lead guy, lead tech, whatever, maintenance, anywhere. I would recommend you get an Excel sheet or a piece of paper, and just look at the process that if there's a process before, talk to somebody that's in that process, and see if you can get a pass-fail for their process, and then try to do a pass-fail, a yield on your process. And then if you really want to extend it, go to the process or the step or the person that receives it after you and have them grade you. You could tie those three processes up, again, just calculate the yield, and you can create an example, quantify it, and take it to your leadership and ask them to consider it. And then just pose the question, wouldn't it be interesting to see this from our customer's perspective? If we rolled up all of our processes, including maintenance, and find out where our threats are. I think that's a great way to start. And I've seen similar situations and where that's happened, and eventually the organization did pick up.
Thank you. And now I have a question about, what would you say the impact or value for a company is of investing in improving something through this process of rolled throughput yield, as opposed to what it costs the company, and how do those compare, and do you have any stats on that?
Unfortunately, I do not have any particular stats on this. Again, just from experience, this has, again, I'm just pulling all the examples back in my head. This has been so easy to incorporate once you have agreement to do it. Again, agreement seems to be the most difficult part that I've seen. Once there's agreement, this is easy, because most aspects of every organization, service organization, whatever, already tracks their performance. You don't have to go. Nobody has to invent or a technical process or go buy brand new software, new calculations, and it's simple. Start with an Excel spreadsheet and just get pass-fail and calculate yield for individuals. I think the cost, aside from a few hours to set it up and explain it, I would think it's virtually free. And I think if an organization doesn't have anything in place like this, the potential, it's almost endless, really. So I think if nothing else, it's almost free to implement, and I would start there.
Excellent. We have another question. Have you come across a situation where a simplified RTOI process was implemented and then it was later updated to go to a deeper level?
Yeah, yes. Yes. The short answer is yes, and then how we did that, we had the pass-fail. I'll go back to the example I had with the rework and the quality hold. It was just a gross figure. It was basically time. It was an average time, so it was in for a week or 2 weeks. And then when it came out, or once it got to process 3, it might have gotten kicked back, and then they measured it. Instead, what we did is we went in there, created a standard work, how many touches, how many characteristics were reviewed and looked at. We broke those out and started measuring those individuals, so we actually took it from a really high level measurement, got 100 parts out of rework and 95% of them were good, to break it down even further into, okay, what is it about this rework process or quality hold process where we need to focus on? And not only did it radically change the measurement, we saw that the impact was severe. I don't remember exactly, but there was something like maybe a 20-point difference. Once we started breaking it down, we realized that there were some things that were not only completely overlooking, but that were causing problems maybe 3 or 4 steps down. It helped us out a lot.
Well, thanks, Andrew. That's all of the questions we currently have. So would you want to advance to the last slide real quick? I'll hang on for one more moment and see if anyone else has any last questions. Okay, well, that's all the questions we currently have. If you think of additional questions afterwards, you can contact Andrew at the information presented on the screen. We'd like to thank Andrew for his time today and all of you for joining us. This concludes today's edition of APICS Extra Live. All content and materials included in this edition of APICS Extra Live are the property of APICS and Andrew Krieger and are protected by the United States and international copyright laws. All rights are reserved.